session today. Thank you very much to our audience joining us online and from many countries, including Belgium, Denmark, France, England, Finland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, amongst many. So we would like to thank you for joining us. We're delighted to welcome our presenters today, and more about them in a moment. My name is Zac Woolfitt from Inholland in the Netherlands, and I'm very excited to have the chance to moderate this session for media and learning on a very important topic. I'm supported by my media and learning colleague Dawitz, who will be helping moderate the chat and the interaction. Before we start, please note the following. We are recording the session, and we make the recording available to everyone who registers along with a recap document. Please keep your cameras on and your microphones off, and let's try to keep it interactive. Use the chat channel to post comments, questions, suggested interesting links, and we'll include those in the recap. Finally, if you adjust your name to include the name of your institution and the country where you're from, that really helps us. Today's schedule is going to be posted in a moment, so you'll see that. And I'm going to keep a very close eye on the time to ensure as many of you as possible have a chance to share your ideas and ask your questions. It really helps if you can be to the point. Each speaker will introduce themselves, and we'll have at least one question from the chat after each of the 4 presentations. Then we'll have a general discussion and we'll wrap up as scheduled. So, AI in higher education, an opportunity or a threat? We know it's a very hot topic at the moment. So Dawitz, if you could run the first poll for us, we would like to know what you think. Before we get started, do you think that do you agree with the statement? How much do you agree with the statement? AI is more an opportunity than a threat in higher education. If you agree a lot, higher number. If you disagree, a lower number. Great, thanks. I can see some nice answers coming in there. So we'll just give everyone a moment to fill that in, and we'll keep that one open for the moment. I'm looking at the moment, we've got 39 people have voted, and 7 and 8 is where we're tending at the moment. So thank you for voting on that. We'll leave it open for a little bit longer. So let's have let's think about, we realize this is a big and complex subject, and it's also a quickly evolving subject. We can't begin to cover the whole subject today. That's not possible. It's not our intention. We're just part of the ongoing discussion, and I'm sure you've been in other webinars, other discussions, because it's such a hot topic. We hope to touch on some of the key themes, and we're planning a follow-up session after the summer. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speakers from the University of Amsterdam to share the screen and to introduce themselves, and that is Jelle, Zuidema, Julia Dawitz, and Emma Wiersma from the University of Amsterdam. The screen is yours.
Great. Well, thanks very much for the invitation. Yes, so since the launch of ChatGPT last November, it really seems that the whole world is talking about generative AI and large language models and the impact it will have on society, including on education. So my name is Jelle Zuidema. I'm associate professor of natural language processing, and that's the field, the scientific field that studies large language models and chatbots. And together with Emma and Julia here from the Teaching Learning Center, we will dive a little bit into the science behind these large language models and our first experience we have with this technology. So with ChatGPT, but also with the many other chatbots and large language models that have been launched by other companies and institutions. So the first question on many people's minds is how is this even possible? So how is it even possible that these chatbots are now so incredibly fluent and knowledgeable? So that's very much a question also for the people in my field, and we have had to struggle with it a little bit longer already than people from other fields. And in fact, it's basically since 2018 that we've seen sort of this steady exponential growth in the size of the models, the amount of computing power that they need, and the amount of training data that they need, as well as in the capabilities that they're showing. So what has really made this possible? So I think if you ask anyone in my field, there's quite a bit of consensus that the key innovations are the following four. So there's the what we call self-supervision and the scaling up to enormous sizes that this has allowed. There's a particular algorithm that is being used. It's called the transformer architecture. And then there's what we call in-context learning, so the design of clever prompts. And then there's the sort of innovative use of human feedback through what's called reinforcement learning. Now, we won't be able to really go into depth on any of these innovations today. But since we are considering the question, what do these developments really mean for education? I want to briefly reflect on the sub-question, like what is it that we really need to know about the technology to be able to assess its impact and its potential for education. Now, in particular, one question that is very relevant for educators is, can we soon blindly trust the answers that these chatbots generate? Are they actually telling us the truth? And the bad news here is that maybe in restricted domains that we can fix the what's so-called hallucination problem, but in the open domain it doesn't look like it will be anytime soon. And to understand why that is the case, let's consider the first innovation that I mentioned, the scaling up and the self-supervision. And in particular, what is useful to know about this, the technology behind it, is that these models are trained on what we call the next word prediction over and over again. It's a very simple task, and it's repeated very, very often on gigantic data sets. And that's has proven very useful, but it does mean that these models do not basically estimate what is a plausible continuation of the prompts that they are presented with, and not necessarily what is true. So to dive into a little example here, if you all hear the word "it's hot, open the," then any human that speaks English can continue with either window or door. And basically we play that game at a very large scale with our language models. So we present a prompt like that to the language model, in this case the transformer, and we ask it to sort of predict like what possible continuations will be. So that might be ask or door or window or what. And initially the predictions will be really terrible. But then we actually check what the next word is, and we calculate an error, and we update the model parameters so that it gets better at this task. Now, this simple task allows scaling up to truly gigantic data sizes, thanks to the fact that it is so simple. So just to appreciate how big the training sets for ChatGPT has been, let's start by imagining 100 million words. That's already very, very difficult. 100 million words would be would be all the words in a library, or all the words you will encounter in spoken form probably through your lifetime. Now, if you multiply all the words that you have seen with 100, then you're getting in the size of Wikipedia. So if we multiply this with 100, then we have maybe that's the entire. We're in the orders of magnitude of what Wikipedia contains. And a couple of years ago, that was a very respectable, very, very large training set for language models. But in the last year, this couple of years, the sizes have also exploded, and so we need to multiply this with another time with 100 to get to the sort of the sizes of that are now used for these large language models. So it's hundreds of billions or even trillions of words that go into these things. And we basically have no control over what is in these data sets. They are too large to properly curate. And it's a very significant portion of the internet that goes in as training data. Okay, let's consider a second question. Can we soon reliably detect whether something is actually machine generated or not? And here also the answer is subtle. So in cooperative settings, if the person that is generating the text with generative AI has no bad intentions, maybe then we can kind of detect that. But in the general session setup and in the adversarial settings, in general, we cannot reliably detect whether something is machine generated. And so to understand this, consider the first innovation that we just discussed, and it's just the sheer scale of this training data means that the large language models are not a model of one competent user, but rather they are trained on the output, the language output of millions of people. And they include many non-native speakers and students and very fluent, accomplished writers. So these models actually are trained to mimic the outputs of all kinds of different people. And then the third innovation I mentioned, in context learning and prompt engineering, becomes crucial, because what we see is that this newest generation of language models, they can take on many different voices depending on how they are prompted. And if you if you design your prompts cleverly, by including particular instructions or examples, you can make the general purpose large language model behave in all kinds of different ways. And in fact, that's what these organizations themselves are doing. So this is the leaked prompt from GitHub Copilot, and you see that we're almost talking to these sort of new models in English, in natural language, to make them to behave the way we want. So we've seen 4 key innovations, and we've seen breathtaking progress. And I think they will be very influential in education. But do keep in mind that these models are optimized to be plausible, to generate plausible and pleasing responses. And there's actually still much work needed and actually ongoing to improve the truthfulness and the safety of these models.
Oh, thank you. Now, Julia and I will tell you a little bit more about a workshop we gave on January for our lecturers when ChatGPT just came out and everyone was in fear, but we wanted to focus on being more constructive and focus on the positive sides of ChatGPT. So we argue that there are 2 main areas for which ChatGPT can be used in education. So as a student learning aid and as lecturer inspiration. And we will quickly go through some examples for both domains. So as a student learning aid, students can use it to practice an exam, for example. So by writing flashcard questions for self-study. And as Jelle already mentioned, large language models, they generate plausible and pleasing responses, but they are not necessarily truthful. So by using it as a practice exam, that's quite a good way for students to use these types of programs because they don't really generate facts, but students can check if they really understand the content, what they learned. But it is very important to use the right prompts because otherwise it's only producing very...
I had a cup of green tea and I very, very carefully did some stretches with my work environment.
Otherwise it only generates very... simple questions, but if you change the prompt and you include, for instance, the learning objectives, then you will get a very different response. And this is an example from a teacher who teaches scientific writing at the TU Delft. That's another city in the Netherlands. And in his course, students were allowed to use ChatGPT for instance, inspiration, but also for rewriting pieces of text. For instance, to check their grammar and their spelling, and he specifically recommended it for students who don't have English as their first language. And after their assignment, they also were asked to write a reflection assignment where they had to explain how they use ChatGPT in their assignment. And this really helped them to reflect on what they've learned and how they can responsibly use ChatGPT in their education.
Yeah, and the second part where we think that things like ChatGPT can be useful is to use as inspiration for us lecturers. I think all of you already had this. You have this basic concept that you have to ask an exam question about a practice question, and you are so out of ideas how to create a question that's actually nice. It's fun to answer, but still is about this basic concept you probably have been teaching for the last 8 years. So what ChatGPT really is good at is create a nice story about it, because it's creating pleasing answers that you can use to create a nice, fun exam question or practice question for the students. What you have to keep in mind is it's not guaranteed that it will create a question that includes everything you ask. So you also have to make sure that your learning objectives are met with this question. Last example that we want to share with you is using ChatGPT actually as a feedback of your own work. So on the left-hand side, you see grading schemes that we developed for pitch. And we were not sure actually if it was complete. So we just asked ChatGPT, and it gives us a whole lot of different answers that are just structured the same way our grading scheme was structured. Well, nice thing is you get a lot of feedback. The bad thing or the problematic thing is ChatGPT gives you all kinds of ideas that you can incorporate, but that not necessarily are aligned with your course. So you have to keep constructive alignment in mind when using those feedback points from ChatGPT. But that's not different from any feedback points probably that you get from your colleagues as well. So to wrap it up, we can use large language models like ChatGPT to help students to learn. We can also use it for ourselves as an inspiration, and that's a big point. They're not necessarily truthful. They're not necessarily right. So what we have to do, and I think that's our responsibility, is we have to train students and also educate our colleagues how to use those large language models properly. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much indeed. And we've got time for one question. I loved some of the language that was being used. Truthfulness is a side effect and optimized to be plausible and pleasing. So I see a question here from Frank Benneker. And that question is, how do we deal with privacy concerns of our students if we ask them to use ChatGPT, which user credentials are not protected? So if you could, somebody from our colleagues, could give a short answer on that one before we move to the next speaker.
So maybe I can answer that one. The privacy concerns, I think, are very real, in particular for ChatGPT. But so maybe this is the moment to sort of like emphasize that there are many other chatbots and large language models now on the market, and many of them are actually pretty good. And some of them can actually be run locally or in Europe and actually in ways that can guarantee privacy. And I think that's where we pretty soon have to move to.
Great, thank you very much indeed. I think we'll come back to that in the general discussion. So thank you for that response there. Thank you to our colleagues from the University of Amsterdam. We will now move to the southern part of Sweden. And that is to Elin Bommenel, who is joining us from Lund University. So, Elin, the screen is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm trying to share with you the fact that the magnolias are in flower in the south of Sweden. We're very proud of this because we're in the north compared to most of you, but still in the south of Sweden. I'm not going to talk about generative AI-based tools in common, not large language models, because I'm very interested in this specific interface, the ChatGPT, and what happened from December 2022 and onwards. I'm going to talk about how this might be a blessing in disguise to us all. And before I introduce myself, I need to introduce the setting that I'm working within. I work in a university that has 45,000 students, with or without flowering magnolias. We've got 8,000 employees, and this is the crowd that leads 45,000 students and 8,000 employees. We've got the Vice Chancellor in the middle, and I work directly under one of the other ones on a project preventing cheating. So I'm trying to prevent cheating at Lund University in a pilot project since September 2022. That's 2 months before the ChatGPT hit the market. I thought I was in for an easy ride. No, I didn't think I was in for an easy ride, but I thought I'd be working with what I already knew. I worked as an educational developer before at a pedagogical unit at our university, and I have tenure, or whatever you call it. I work as a senior lecturer at the Department of Service Studies at my university. So we take an interest in how organizations work, what leadership is, how people experience service and value co-creation, co-creating things like knowledge. Yeah. So that's me. And I work directly under one of these vice chancellors, and these 8 people lead our organization, usually feeling like this during the day. If you've ever tried university leadership, you may have experienced the metaphor under your skin of trying to lead cats or herd cats. Our vice chancellors have been trying to herd cats at Lund University since 1666. They being the cats, make a point of ignoring what the vice chancellors say, claiming academic freedom, saying that's a very interesting contribution to the debate, and then completely ignoring what the leadership and management says, as cats do. So I've got 8 managers feeling like they're herding cats, and all of a sudden this happens. 8,000 cats turn around and ask to be herded. When that happens, and it hasn't happened since 1666, you know that something big has happened. Yeah. So the 8 managers at my university are in a state of shock. This has never happened before, and I may exaggerate a little bit to make my point, but the point is important, that the ChatGPT, or large language models that they're built upon, is the biggest thing that has happened to education at my university since 1666, and it may be a blessing in disguise. And I'd like to take a few minutes and trying to explain to you why it might be a blessing in disguise. When I ask the students at my university how they use ChatGPT, this is what they say. This is how they use it. And when I talk to the teachers about it, I need to talk in a more pedagogical way because teachers find it more difficult to understand. And this is how I talk to the teachers about it. The students use it to get over procrastination issues because they can get over reader's block and writer's block. The teachers or the students use it as extra teachers, teaching them academic literacy. And yes, they will use it for cheating. And that is a fundamental problem, of course. That is the obvious threat for our university or any university. When the students use the ChatGPT to substitute their own learning, exams will be neither fair nor secure. And that will mean that degrees, as a consequence, will lose quality, utility, and status. But there are less obvious threats, and they have to do with a poor understanding of how large language models work and how large language models are expressed in ChatGPTs of the students. Because when they don't understand them, they will use them for cheating rather than use them for getting over procrastination issues and as an extra teacher. And I need to borrow a model from HFS Research, which is a British analyzing organization that kindly shared this excellent model on Twitter. And it's been adapted by the AI expert in my project. I know very little about artificial intelligence. I'm originally a historian. There you've got it. Now you know why I'm obsessed with 1666. Okay, so I needed to hire an AI expert. And he said, think about the Dunning-Kruger effect, the cognitive bias of people with low ability, low expertise or experience regarding a certain type of task or area of knowledge, how they tend to overestimate their ability or knowledge. So when you first hear of a new concept and you like it, you tend to think that you understand it and you have great confidence in ChatGPT. And this is how your confidence develops with your knowledge, according to the Dunning-Kruger model. You're initially very excited, and then something happens and you realize I may not be able to use this. The students, according to the HFS kindly shared model, initially say, wow, ChatGPT, that's Google on steroids. It can solve all my problems and I can get my degree for free. This is wonderful. I will party all year around. And then they say, wait a minute. It's powered by a large language model. And it seems that the large language model is some kind of statistical tool that they use to predict language without really understanding it. And they produce statistically plausible answers. Darn. I'm not going to be able to use ChatGPT because it will give incorrect answers. When they start understanding it, they will realize it gives answers it cannot trust, but they might be careful looking out for the answers they cannot trust, and they might be able to detect them. But the problem is that they really need to be able to understand when ChatGPT hallucinates, to recognize when it gets things completely wrong. How do you do that? How do you recognize when it hallucinates? Whoops. I guess you need a university education to realize that. Yeah, a traditional university education with curricular knowledge. That's the first thing you need. And in every curricular knowledge, there's not only curricular knowledge, and you know that if you're interested in pedagogics at all, that every discipline has concepts or understandings that are hard to grasp, and they need to be grasped in specific ways according to that discipline. So you need something else to learn how ChatGPT is hallucinating in your specific field. You need some academic literacy. You need to be able to understand, for instance, how do we learn in our field? How can I be a person that is a learner? And how can I think of knowledge in my field? And how did the teachers of 45,000 students get equipped with 1 and 2 curricular knowledge and academic literacy that they need to teach 45,000 students? Well, they get curricular knowledge by doing, in Sweden, a 4-year training. I don't know how long the PhD is in your country. In Sweden, you get 4 years. And if you want tenure as a senior professor, which is what I've got, you get 5 weeks of training on how grown-ups learn. If we have good teachers in my university, it's for 1 or 2 reasons. Either it's because the individual has some resources within themselves that makes them really good at helping others grow into knowledgeable persons. And if they know how to handle ChatGPT, it's because they're early adopters. They were not taught this in 5 weeks, I promise you. Or the other reason can be because there is some good tacit knowledge buried in the walls, in the institutions where people teach. So the teachers don't really know what it is that they do, but if they do, as their predecessors have done, it seems to work and the students seem to learn. But there is no tacit knowledge embedded in the walls of my university from 1666. what has been embedded in the walls has become obsolete overnight, and it happened in December 2022. So some individual wonderful teachers with individual capacities, some super users, have 5 weeks of training that was done before the ChatGPT hit the market, and they're meant to help the students get to 0.5 on the Dunning-Kruger scale. They need guidance, and they need guidance from these 8 people. So the question, if your university is ready to benefit from ChatGPT or to meet the challenges with ChatGPT, might very well be a question of if it has a pedagogical unit with organizational support. And with organizational support, I mean funding, legitimacy, and staff to continue the 5 weeks of training to write policies. And I come from a background where we study how technology and society evolve. That's the PhD I did 100 years ago. I worked as an educational developer, and I do research on the co-creation of value and co-creation of knowledge in organizations. And from that background, I say, this is a blessing that we've been waiting for. Universities around the world will need educational development and teacher training that in itself will do so much good for teachers and students alike. And I'm very curious about what it looks like at your universities if you have one of those pedagogical or educational development units. So please go in and answer the poll if you haven't done it so far.
Thank you so much, Elin. Really fantastic to get that sort of the pedagogical aspect, how we're going to manage those aspects. I love some of the things you say, a blessing in disguise, 8,000 cats asking to be herded. And you've got tacit knowledge is not embedded in the walls. And how do we help students look out for answers that you can't trust? These are really interesting questions. I saw there was a comment about the Dunning-Kruger. Maybe we'll come back to that in the discussion. I see a question from Jana, which perhaps could be answered. If large learning models language models is good enough for processing, retrieving, combining, editing, and analyzing information, is that enough for skilled professionals in working life? So I don't know if Elin, you have some ideas about that. What does the brain not learn if AI does a lot of heavy lifting? Can you shed some ideas on that?
I would be very hesitant to say that. One of our pilot environments is the training doctors at Lund University, and they'd be very hesitant to use that when they're diagnosing and helping patients. And I'm very grateful that they're hesitant to use it. And one of the reasons is that it's a company secret, isn't it, to OpenAI, what has gone into the corpus, the knowledge base. We cannot openly contest it and choose between what we believe in and what we don't believe in, because we don't understand the corpus. So until the corpus becomes open in some way, I would say, no, please don't. At least not when I go to my doctor.
Yeah, very important points. At which point we will be able to trust them, and whether that will develop over time. And of course, we're at the very bottom of the hyperbolic curve, things going up, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So the questions you're asking, Elin, are very important. Thank you so much for your presentation, for your questions. I would like to move to the next speaker, so we stay on track with time. And please keep the questions coming in the chat. I'd like to invite my colleague from Inholland, Peter Hollants, to share his screen. And Peter, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Zac. Well, if it's good, you see my presentation. I'm Peter Hollants. I work at Inholland. We've got about 25,000 students. I'm an independent presenter, so opinions are my own. I work 30 years as a teacher, and as a coordinator and as an advisor. And now I'm working in the IT support department.
We don't see your screen yet,
Oh.
Peter. If you could try share it one more time.
Okay. Oh, now you do. Forgot to push the share button. You see it now? Okay, yeah. Well, I'm going to give a presentation about, well, more or less the organization. Are we AI ready in education? I have two versions, a long version and a short version. The short version is no, thank you for your attention, but I will do the long version. Well, the state of affairs. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, the state of affairs. ChatGPT appeared around November 2022, and by now we probably have an idea what ChatGPT is. Certainly after the presentations given right now. It's part of a much larger development of AI technology, and many AI-based apps are appearing, and AI is being integrated in existing applications. We know there are opportunities and threats. That's the title of this meeting. The threats are the privacy issues, behavioral influence, big tech monopoly, disinformation, deep fakes, discrimination, data breaches, and of course it also generates, as said, some bullshit. And that are the threats, and there are many more threats, of course, job loss, but we also have the opportunities. Some of them are mentioned. AI can help can be helpful in making presentations. It can give you quickly suggestions and of which you never thought of, and it can reduce boring work and make work more efficient. It has an impact on our private lives and at work, and that will be much more. Well, developments are moving very fast, and there are calls for a pause in development of the technology. And we know that legislation is lagging behind if we think about, for instance, privacy. So these are the discussions which are happening right now. Then prompt engineering. Some of us already have gained some experience in querying the chatbot. Some of us apply it in our daily work, and questioning the chatbot is a skill. So you need knowledge for that, like is said. And asking only by asking good questions, you can get good answers, and you can judge the answers. We call those questions or instructions prompts, and people who ask those questions to a chatbot are called prompt engineers. And I think we should be good prompt engineers ourselves, but then within our own educational organization. Well, I have to. And the questions I have, and many people have, are the following. So new professions will emerge, and some will disappear, and many professions will change. And we are training our students for these professions. So what does that mean for the curriculum? Also, higher education now faces challenges due to, the same applies to assessment. We will continue to assess our students in the same way. Then higher education now faces challenges due to dwindling funding and teacher shortages. Can AI provide a solution for that? And do we have to reinvent our education? Some people, some experts speak about a paradigm shift. And then how urgent is it, all this, and or is it business as usual? And now I'm already to my last slide. And if we talk about education, what are we talking about? The situation in the Netherlands in higher education, at least at Inholland, is as follows. Well, we've got the students. I had some examples, but the examples were given. So we've got the teachers. We've got assessment committees, and they are responsible for the quality of the tests, and this committee acts on the content. Then we've got exam boards. This committee focuses on the progress of testing and assessments. Then we got a curriculum committee. The curriculum committee ensures that the curriculum matches the students' professional practice. Current developments in the professional field should seep through the program. Professional field committee. The professional field committee is a sounding board for the connection between the study program and the professional field. So to be fair, these committees are not everywhere active, but where they do function, they can provide important input regarding the rapid changes in technology. Then we got a co-determination, and that is obliged by law. Employees and students represent their constituency. And last but not least, we've got also the staff, and the staff includes many departments, such as the legal affairs department. They are expert on fraud and violation of privacy. We've got the IT department. They are making contracts with software vendors and functional manages the software. And we've got the library, where information specialists instructs on information literacy. Well, that's not all, because that was internally, but externally, we've also got a lot of players. For instance, our software suppliers, education software such as assessment programs, learning management systems, but also software for portal systems to give students access to timetables and test registrations. Well, how far are those software suppliers and in their development, and do they have a vision at all? And my personal experience with them says no. The majority of them are lagging behind and even don't have a vision. So I can elaborate some more later on if you want. We've got knowledge institutions like SURF, but also this one, media and learning. And are we sufficiently connected with these organizations? As well, if I look at Inholland, and what do we bring, but what do we get back, and how does it cycle through the organization? There's all kinds of questions, of course. Then and there's a lot more of entities, of course, and all these parties must be knowledgeable if they are want to able to be thinking and discussing about AI. And so my question is, where are we now? Should there be a governing nationally or at the school level? Does our executive board has to ask for a strategy? What do you expect of it? Are we doing the right things, and are we doing the things right? So I'm very curious how your organization is managing this all. I saw in the previous poll, it was very interesting. Everyone has a pedagogical unit, and I'm really curious what they are doing, what they have done the last half year. So that is my presentation. I see
Thank you
people laughing.
Thank you very much, Peter.
Yeah.
And I see some interesting links being added to the chat, which we'll include in the final wrap-up document. And Peter, I also know that you asked some really interesting questions. I love this idea of a prompt engineer we have to be good prompt engineers for our own organization.
Yeah.
How do we ask the right questions for our own organization, and in order to get the right answers? So maybe we're not yet asking the right questions. And you also mentioned a paradigm shift. Is it urgent, or is it business as usual? So I'll be very interested to know from the audience as well, if you see this as a paradigm shift, with suddenly cats asking to be herded. Do you see it that way? You know, where are we now? Questions about governance as well. I can see, is there one particular question? Well, I would also mention, Peter, I know that, for instance, a lot of research is being collected, for instance, in our organization in Holland. One of the members of the audience is also collecting data how do we respond? How do we do that? So if anyone else has got data that they've collected on how your organization is responding, that would be very helpful to share that in the links, or if you're working on research, please include that. I guess my question for you, Peter, and what you shared here was the complexity of the educational landscape. There's so many layers integrated. How can we respond? Because do we respond organically, or do we have to respond in a structured way because it's happening so quickly? How do you see an organization should respond, or do you think they will respond to these challenges?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on this matter, I have to say, but I have some ideas. I think we have to be a network organization, and we are not yet that. If we top down doesn't work, but we have to prevent chaos. But where it well, at least I think my opinion is that when we've got Corona, or we had Corona, we heard our board of directors. They had an opinion and they told us what to do. But this is a little bit different, of course, but the impact is the same. And now we don't hear much. And even on a national level, we don't hear much because it is well, there are going to change a lot of things. And to me, it's strange we don't hear things. I think, well, I mentioned some parties, some departments, and I am very curious if they have an assignment, or if their network is okay with the not only intern but also extern, the curricula committees. They are very important. Have they done something, or are they sitting still? Are they waiting? I don't know. I don't hear it. So is that the answer to your question, by the way?
It's a big question, and I think you're sort of explaining the complexity of that. So I think we'll continue the discussion. And I think what you mentioned is the interrelatedness of everything. And I think I saw just recently that one of the big tech companies got fined a massive amount. Don't need to mention who that was, but the process of that legislation coming into place, it takes years and years, and yet we're at the foot of this hyperbolic curve that's increasing so quickly. So it's going to be there's going to be a real imbalance between the speed with which legislation, guidelines, protocols can come into place, and the speed that the AI self-learning is taking place. We're just at the beginning of the process. So I think it will be quite interesting from that point of view to see what happens next. So thank you, Peter, for that overview.
You're welcome.
I'm going to invite our next speakers to join us now. And that is Mr. Peter Parnes from Luleå University, way in the north of Sweden, way up, but not far from the Arctic Circle. So Peter, thank you very much for joining us today. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. So hi, everybody. My name is Peter Parnes, and I'm a professor in pervasive and mobile computing at Luleå University of Technology, where I also run the Architect Learning Lab. And today I'm going to talk briefly about the future of AI and learning. So just to recap, the area we're talking about here is generative AI. And so far today, we've primarily spoken about text generation, but generative AI also include generation of many other things, including pictures, sounds, music. We have a number of legal cases right now regarding the right to voices, for instance, in the music industry. And the computer gaming industry will completely change using generative AI. And all of these different areas will be influenced by AI. So just to recap, so we have ChatGPT. It was released on end of November last year, just a few months ago or several months ago, and it can help us with many, many different things. And the thing I wanted to highlight from a learning perspective is that it's always there as a helper. And I'll come back to that in a moment, discussing this from a learning perspective. So just to show you a few examples here, this is the state of generating images today. So I would say this is sort of a solves problem. We can generate tremendous quality pictures. Adobe just released yesterday a beta of the next Photoshop system where you can then add things to your photos and make it totally photorealistic, these sort of AI editions. Another way that we can use AI is to consume lectures in a new way. So this is just one of several different systems that are available today. This is openuni.ai, where you can give it a link to a presentation on YouTube. It will transcribe it using AI to get sort of audio to text, and then feed that transcription into ChatGPT, so you can then ask questions on this lecture. And you can also use this for better inclusion with using various different languages. For instance, here on the right is that you can ask it in Polish instead on a Swedish lecture, which is in this example here. So this is just one example of many. Another thing that I want to highlight is this sort of, we have had tools for getting help with programming using AI for several years, actually, in Copilot, in GitHub. But with the advent of ChatGPT, it can not only answer questions sort of on text, but also can help us learn programming and learn how to use various technical tools and getting help with that. And that is actually very key to at least my students that are learning how to program, that they can get this help anytime. So looking a bit sort of going towards the future here, the capabilities of AI systems today is something we can look at the sort of this picture. It's a sort of a very rough picture of the development of the capabilities of AI systems. So the x-axis is years starting at the end of the 90s. And then if we look at the y-axis, that is sort of the capability of the system. 0 meaning that's sort of what humans can do on a general level, and -100 is the AI system can't do anything. And the interesting thing here is that when we sort of start researching AI into certain areas, it takes some time, but in the end, the AI system always outperforms the humans. And here we can see, for instance, handwriting recognition took some time before we got there. And then we had speech recognition a bit quicker, image recognition, reading comprehension, and language comprehension. And the last two, the development there is basically vertical, meaning that we've learned how to develop these kinds of AI systems, and we're doing it very, very rapidly. And this will also translate into future areas that we look into. And what future areas do we see then? Well, one of them being, for instance, emotional intelligence. AI systems today are really, really bad at sort of understanding and handling feelings, understanding the feelings of the users, and also how to sort of present text and results in a sort of different ways depending on the moods. ChatGPT might seem to be very good at sort of problem solving and decision making, but that area will be much, much better in the future. These large language models are trained on huge amounts of data, as we've heard, but there's very little room for personalization when it comes to the text-based models. In the AI, in the picture generation models, we already have personalizations where I can sort of extend the models with my own data. And that's something we also will see when it comes to text generation, where we sort of mix personal data with the larger language models. The language tools today, like ChatGPT and Bard and the others, they have a very limited sort of context. That is, they have a limited size of the memory, and they don't remember very far back. And this is also something that will change in the future, where we sort of mix both the AI model with more traditional data methods, like vector databases, for instance. We are now seeing tools where we can take these trained models and mixing that with live data, and I'll show an example in a moment. And we also see that new ways of interacting with these text models. For instance, doing this through multimodal interaction, where we can both add text questions, text prompts, and images. I guess you all understand what sort of would happen in this picture here. We have a number of balloons, we have strings, and if I cut the string at the bottom, they would fly away. I mean, that's quite a simple thing to understand as a human, but from an AI perspective, this is quite a tricky problem to solve. And OpenAI has shown that this is sort of coming to ChatGPT in the near future. One application of this is to help people that are visually impaired. So Be My Eyes is an organization that's been around for several years, helping people that are visually impaired through video conferencing with people that can see. And here instead, they use AI technologies to get a description of what the visually impaired person is looking at. And that obviously will help that person quite a lot. Other things that we'll see, as I mentioned before, is this sort of mixing large language models with live information. And just last week, this was released to all paying customers of ChatGPT in GPT-4, where you can then browse data and connect that with the traditional ChatGPT. They also released what's called the plugins, where you can interact with various external services. So this sort of mix of live data and trained data is something we'll see in the future. And these are just here 2 examples of the exact same prompt, where I ask it to give me a summary of my own blog there. And as you can see, there's quite different layout of it, how it sort of presents and did the summary there. So what does this mean for the educational system? Well, one of the things that we'll see is sort of adaptive learning systems, and I'll talk about that briefly in a moment, but also coming into this sort of individual learning, where we have systems that adapt and sort of scheduled just for me. There's many different areas that we can dive into and perhaps get into in the discussion afterwards. So, but to help us sort of get this personalized and adaptive learning experiences, these systems will be able to give us sort of smarter content, where the content changes depending on my previous answers. It builds on my earlier learning. It can help me with long-term memory retention through repetition, sort of adding in, sort of, you struggled a bit with this area last month, and then it sort of can come back to that, and then combining different subjects in my learning. And also coming to assessing knowledge continuously, getting away from this sort of end of course, end of program testing, etc. And something I really learn and enjoy in this area is this sort of Socratic learning, where the system can help me learn by asking me questions. This is just one example from when we look at AI assistants. So this is from Khan Academy, which is a nonprofit in the US that's been around for many years, helping primarily young children learn, where they are releasing their integration to GPT, the underlying brain of ChatGPT, where you can ask questions, but it will not answer the questions immediately, but it sort of will help you get to the answer yourself. This is sort of Socratic learning once again, and helping teachers as well as a helper there. This also means perhaps that we'll get a higher equality in learning, and that is that the teacher might want to help everybody but won't have time or isn't available 24/7. These AI tools and AI assistants are there all the time and can help the students learn more. And they can also help, as we've seen in the examples earlier, help the teacher generate better content for the learners to learn even better. So to summarize, this might also mean that lead to that we can consume education in sort of a faster way. Certain researchers claim that that will happen, and that we will learn faster when we can get the sort of these answers through summaries and confirmation of knowledge quicker. But what does that imply? Does that mean that we'll have sort of shorter educational programs, or will we do it as we always done, and that we just will add more content to our educational programs? And to summarize, ChatGPT was launched at end of November last year and has been the sort of fastest growing internet service ever in human history, which is achieved just in the first 4 days. It reached 1 million active users. But something I want to point out here is that the changes is happening very, very quickly, and we'll see very, very many different types of AI tools in the future, and they will be sort of integrated into our daily tools and daily learning experiences. And the bottom line is that perhaps these tools can help the teacher to get more free time and have the deeper discussions with the students. And with that, thank you very much, and you can find way more information on this subject on my blog that you have in the URL here in the middle. So
Peter,
thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter, for that mind-bending look towards the future, and all the links will be shared. Thank you, Dawitz, just shared the link to your blog in the chat there. And I think pick on a couple of things you mentioned. You talked about the right to voices. I mean, our voice is so personal. We know that can now be easily copied. You said something that really grabbed me, which is it takes some time, but in the end, AI always outperforms humans. Which on the one hand is a little bit scary, but and I wonder if that will be on all tasks. So maybe we'll come to that in a moment. And this thing about consuming education faster, can we learn more quickly? But in this whole story and discussion, I'm sort of wondering where our humanness is. If we're not teaching sort of memorization things, how can AI help us to be more human, or is that where we have the edge over AI?
So right now we definitely have an edge in these tools when it comes sort of humanness, and as I mentioned, talking briefly about sort of the emotional part as well. Unfortunately, I think that we will reach a level of AI where we reach the sort of the AGI, the artificial general intelligence. That is, today all our AI systems are so-called narrow AI systems. They are very good at a specific task, but in the future we'll have AIs that sort of are generally intelligence, just as humans, that we can do basically everything. But that also means that if we look at in that picture I showed, that it sort of becomes better than humans, also means that the AIs, the general AI, will become better, and that is what we call then a super intelligence. And that might lead to really scary scenarios where historically we've seen like the most intelligent like entities are the one that's sort of winning in society on Earth. And if here we're creating an AI that perhaps available in less than 10 years that will be smarter than all of humans. And we will have many of these, not sort of a single super intelligence, but many super intelligence. And I think that will already this year and then over the coming years, we'll see a lot of regulation coming here. Just a few days ago, the CEO of OpenAI, he compared that we need to have regulations on the level of nuclear power, both for energy, but also weapon, like international treaties on how do we use these tools. And if people get scared of this, I think they should, or we should be scared of what will happen in the future. A long answer to your question.
Yeah, you raised some very interesting points there. Multiple super intelligences. It does sound a little bit overwhelming. And I'm not sure if our audience and people in the audience have seen the AI dilemma made by the guys who made the social dilemma. but they talk about, you know, the nuclear weapon sort of image. But the difference with AI is that AI is actually reinventing itself without our control. So, you know, we don't want it to be all about doom and gloom and scary things.
No, of
but
course not.
it has enormous potential, but it does also have some a darker side, and how visible that is going to be very, very interesting. Do you think, Peter, that we can move, legislation can move fast enough to tackle it in a timely manner?
So one effect we've already seen is actually GDPR. It has blocked Google's release of their ChatGPT Bard in Europe. So they released it to basically the whole world except Europe or EU last week. You can get around that through VPN, running VPNs to the US and get access to the tool. But they say that they don't comply with GDPR, so they don't release it. The European Union and Brussels, they released suggestions on regulations for the training and transparency already in September last year, and there was new regulation being proposed last week, which sort of compares the AI engine training to weapons, basically. And that, so there would be the same rules there in transparency, for instance. And this, I think, is one of the keys. One of the earlier speakers mentioned that we don't know what data we actually have been trained on, or these models have been trained on. And OpenAI, they don't tell us. So we can speculate, and we don't know what's in those models there. But with this regulation, they would actually be forced to tell us what it's been trained on, for instance.
Yeah, so it's a number of, we need to move, and we need to find a way to, you know, from the other Peter's perspective on the complexity of education to society. So thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation. We're going to come to the general questions now. So I would like to ask the audience to put your questions into the chat now. And I would like to go back to our first speakers back at the University of Amsterdam, and maybe ask Jelle, Julia, and Emma, if one of you could just pick up on one point you've heard, and just a couple of sentences on what you've seen or what you've heard that's interested you.
There's so much said. It's difficult to choose, but just the last thing that's still fresh in memory, Peter's presentation is this big worries about sort of like what AI might do to us in the longer run. So I have a slightly different perspective in there. Like, I mean, I don't disagree in. Don't deeply disagree about the need to discuss this, but I do think it's important to realize that these large language models at the moment still live in very, very big supercomputers, right? So we're certainly not at a stage that these models sort of can replicate themselves into some lots of other hardware that's available. They only work on very big machines that can always be switched off. Right, so there's definitely still maybe there's a need to discuss the long-term risks, and we should do this, but we can take our time for this. And what's much more urgent when it comes to these sort of political consequences of this, to discuss the short-term risks, the use of this technology to generate misinformation, also the things that will go wrong in education. Just to come back to our themes, if this technology is used in the wrong way. And I think that's the very urgent discussion we ought to have right now, and we can set up a United Nations committee and take our time to discuss the long-term risks later on. So I'm a bit less worried about that at the moment.
Good. Thank you for that reassurance. That's appreciated, Jelle, that we can always switch the machines off. So we'll come back to that one. To our second speaker, just a quick reflection, Elin, on what you've heard before we get questions from the public.
I'm interested in the intersection between what Julia and Emma said and what Peter was talking about. Julia and Emma said it's our responsibility to train students and colleagues to use the large language models properly. And I'm wondering, how can we encourage and teach them to do this when the corpus is a company secret? to, at the moment, OpenAI. Will it be possible to build a university-specific or a nation-specific or European-specific model for universities on top of GPT-4 or GPT-4.5 or GPT-5, where we will be able to see the sources? It would be wonderful to take responsibility for it, but at the moment I wouldn't recommend my university do it, because we don't think it belongs in academia to use knowledge where we are not able to see the sources.
May I react on that one?
Yeah, I just would like, yeah, go ahead quick, and then I'd like to hear from the other two speakers, and then we'll go to the general discussion. So go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's probably a bit naive to think that we can keep things like ChatGPT out of the university. We can forbid it, but can we really prevent students using it? So I much rather teach my students to use this not perfect thing responsibly than forbid it, and then they never learn how to use it in a good way. That's a decision that we make. But yeah, I totally understand your hesitation, because we don't know what's in there.
Great, thank you for that comment very much indeed. If you could just summarize, Peter from Inholland, a point to pick up on.
You mean about my presentation?
No, about what you've heard, if anything.
Oh yeah, but maybe one of the last ones. You can switch machines off. That's an interesting, of course, technically you can, but maybe there are people that won't agree. If you look at Montana, there is something going on with TikTok, and I don't know if the arguments are okay to switch off TikTok, but there are a lot of people disagreeing with that, because they are dependent with their incomes. They earn money by using TikTok. So that's an argument they bring in. And another thing is, well, they have a right on information and the right to express themselves. So if you switch off a machine and people are already independent with large sums of money, well, that's my question. Well, how do you see that, Peter? It's more a question.
Yeah, well, we'll move to you now, Peter, to maybe see if you want to pick up on one of the points you've seen, or you can answer that question, and then we'll go to the general discussion.
So I just wanted to quickly, there were several things there I picked up. So just to Elin's comment there, sort of knowing what we're doing. So in Sweden, we are actually training our own GPT right now within this WASP initiative. So together with NVIDIA, we have a supercomputer that is training on the Swedish GPT-3. The problem, just I want to emphasize one issue here with this sort of these language models. It's not only a question of training this through sort of this sort of supercomputer training, but it also all these sort of add-ons, the alignments that OpenAI and others are doing on top of that, where you sort of add feedback to the systems and sort of retrain certain smaller details in them. And that is extremely costly. It's meaning it's thousands of people doing this. And then this is, so that's one of the challenges today. It's so expensive to do this there.
Great, thank you for that, Peter. I would like to just pick up on a couple of questions so everyone has a chance to contribute. I see an interesting question from Jana, and then also Koos talking about the makeup of today's audience, which are interesting points. Maybe start with Jana. I don't know, would you be able to switch on your microphone and ask a question to the group and see if someone would like to answer that?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in our university system, generally the attitude has been very accepting, but they've always added that it has to be equal and fair for all, whether it's students or staff, being able to implement AI into teaching and curriculum. So the next question for us who are responsible for, let's say, giving pedagogical training for staff, we ask, well, how quickly, in what scale, like where do we start, like how quickly should we adapt to this huge challenge of implementing AI and LLMs into pretty much everything that we teach at the university? Can we use anything? Can anybody use anything?
Would somebody like to answer that from the panel?
Just, I've been working quite a lot with this on so across the pond from you in Luleå, from across the water from Luleå, and we encourage to look at sort of how can this be used to help learning. So how can we help the students learn better, learn more? And that is the sort of the stance we have at our university in Luleå. But then that sort of leads to the challenge of how do we educate the teachers? How do we educate the students to use this? And that part will take a lot of time, actually. But in general, my colleagues are very, very positive, way more positive actually than I expected when I started talking about this in last year.
Great, thank you. Elin, go ahead. You had something to add to that?
Yeah, just to say that I think maybe the big challenge, Janne, is to keep it out of the examination room, the exam room, and make sure that we use it as best we can in the learning situations. That is the $1,000 or $1 million question, isn't it?
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, division, and it comes back to assessment, how we're assessing, what we're assessing. I'd love to, Koos, you mentioned something about the observation of the makeup of the group today, the countries where we're presenting from, and you say, will the usage, early adaptation of AI also enlarge global differences? I don't know if somebody would like to comment on that. Maybe from Amsterdam.
Yeah. So one thing I can say, I mean, I think the exact composition of the current presenters is a function of something else. But I think it's true that these tools will probably be picked up mostly initially in countries where there's already a lot of internet usage and a lot of experience with digital tools anyway. But I think the fields, my field, natural language processing, is working hard in sort of also democratizing this technology, and also, for instance, working hard on making them really multilingual and sort of like also available in what we call low resource languages. So it's already quite impressive what you see in the performance of ChatGPT on how multilingual it is in sort of the major European languages, for instance, but also some, like a number of non-European languages. It's very fluent, but it is mostly, it is much less so in low resource languages for which there was limited training data. But I think we're making progress on sort of like finding ways of building tools with similar capabilities based on less training data, and or on that you train on related languages, such that a language with a lot of resources is essentially lending its sort of its power to related languages that have that where fewer resources are available. So I think if we should just not stare too much at the current tools, but really think a little bit ahead and see where the field is moving. And in 1 or 2 years, the field will be quite different, and there will be in many different languages, similar tools will be available.
Yeah, thank you for that, and also pointing out how quickly it's moving. It's very difficult for us really to understand, first of all, the data sets, or those boxes. My mind is still exploding from all the millions and millions and millions of words. and then also the speed at which AI in general is picking up and replicating and developing. I see a question from Keith back at 1448. Keith was asking, what do we need to equip our students with so that they can keep up and make a meaningful contribution in their future careers? So Elin, I see you smiling on that one. Maybe you want to, from the pedagogical perspective, want to comment on that?
Well, they obviously need a university education in order to use the ChatGPT, but no, that's not a serious answer. I think his question deserves a more serious answer. What we need to equip our students with is probably the same thing as we needed to equip them with 30 years ago and 300 years ago, and that is some kind of general fundamental knowledge is what it is that you need in order to be a human being. So you need some kind of intelligence, being able to adopt your knowledge into different sorts of situation. You need some kind of knowledge base. You need some kind of emotional competence. So you need knowledge, emotional competence, and you need the ability to apply that in different situations. And it's not going to change that very much, but we need to do it in new ways. They are working with new tools, and these tools are going to rapidly change society. In 15 years' time, we're going to have very different societies. So how can we prepare our students for lifelong learning? We are not going to be able to teach them what the world is going to look like in 15 years' time. So maybe we need to teach them lifelong learning and always wanting to come back. And then when they come back, we must have something to give them.
Very interesting points there. It comes back to our humanness and you know, how we as humans, what are our human qualities? Peter from Luleå, I saw you nodding there. Did you want to add something or?
Yeah, no, just as I was nodding and agreeing, and this whole the lifelong learning or the continuous learning, as I like to call it, is like how can we teach our students to learn? But that also means that we need to teach our teachers to teach our students how to learn, and not only to sort of look at sort of the boring part, that is sort of the facts, etc., but rather trying to look at the bigger picture within learning. And I hope that sort of these AI tools will also force many teachers to look on a sort of wider perspective when it comes to assessing knowledge, for instance, looking at the whole process of learning. I think we have too much efforts going into looking just sort of at the final, like a snapshot of knowledge, like the exams, already from young years. All learning is put together around these tests and national tests that we have in various countries. So there's so much focus on these tests instead of looking at sort of what is learning. How can we experiment? For instance, failure is a great way to learn. Experiment, try out things, and if you fail, then you most likely learn something. But in our current system, that's sort of, it's hard to get a positive outcome out of failure when it comes to a course. That is something I try to teach my students and convey, and I hope these AA tools will help us get more of that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Peter. And it's very interesting because it's about, we mentioned a paradigm shift perhaps, but there's also the sense of, you know, how do we teach? What are we teaching? What does learning mean? And I personally find it very exciting because it's really challenging us to rethink our lessons, to rethink our assessments, to rethink the types of aspects that we're focusing on in the curricula. And it comes back, I keep saying humanist, but it comes back to who we are as humans, our sense of identity, and our ability and our own knowledge to critically interact. Particularly if we go back to your point, it takes some time, but in the end, AI always outperforms humans. So we have to think about how we can use it as a partner. We're coming close to the end. We've still got a few minutes to go. So if there are particular questions, please add those in the chat. Peter Hollants from Inholland, I don't know if there's something you'd like to pick up on from what you've heard. I'd like to chip in with something.
Yes. I had some thoughts, but I forgot. What was the last thing that
we were talking about the humanness and about how
Oh
you
yeah,
teach and
yes.
education.
Well, there are, of course, there are some a lot of hurdles to take, and there are a lot of worries because when we use those tools now, I'm speaking about now or maybe in a year, we don't know if we can trust those tools. So we cannot mandate our students and tell them you must learn those to deal with those chatbots, because when they put information in those tools, you don't know what's going to happen. So that's a practical thing I've learned from a manager who said things were impossible, and what's the English word, the neiging, the one has the how you say,
The desire or the wish.
the desire
yeah.
to say that things are not possible, but we have to look how is it possible, how can we do it, not forbid it or say, well, there are some risks, so we don't do it, but we have to look for possibilities so we can do it. Otherwise, students are going to the exam committee or something, and they protest because they don't want to work with it. Same with proctoring during the corona. And you've got the cameras and so there are a lot of students that don't like that. So there will be students that don't like to chat with chatbots. That's it.
Yeah, the personal preference. And you know, I think if I look back a few years, we had our friend COVID and everything went online. I thought that was a pretty dramatic moment in the history of education. But November last year, I think was the next level as well of changes. Before we wrap things up, I would just wonder if any of our panel have anything else to add, or if anyone has one final question for a member of the panel. If so, throw it out there. Otherwise, we'll go to the wrap up phase.
There's one thing I think we haven't discussed so much yet, which is that it was mentioned also by Peter Parnes, for instance, and also by Peter Hollants, that the risk of sort of like a few big players, big tech companies or their affiliates dominating this space. And I do think as educators we also have a role of not forcing our students to sort of sign up early on to one of those big players in the field. So we should really reflect on sort of like mentioned a couple of times that there are these other players around, but we should reflect on whether I think it's good that students know about ChatGPT, work with it, know how it works. But we also have a role to play in sort of like making sure that the market dynamics are not leading everyone to all be completely dependent on just one or two big players, because there will be many other players around that are just a few months behind, but might have very different expertise that will be also extremely useful in education.
So a very important point there, Jelle. So thank you for that about not just being sucked into one dynamic or one tool or one big company using the device, but actually to use either different ones or to have some freedom. And I love to hear that in Sweden they're developing their own sort of large language model. But of course, not every country has the resources or the technology or the ability to do that. We're out of time, guys, which is I think we've just started going with the discussion, and I really want to thank everybody for adding your comments in the questions in the chat. We'll summarize that, and my head is full of ideas, full of new thoughts. So thank you really to our speakers. A huge round of applause for your time and your expertise and your contribution. And I'm going to